Hey, everybody, this is Charles Warner. I'm the editor-in-chief with Cannabis and Tech Today. Thank you for joining us here at Emerge. We have a very special guest today. I'm very excited to speak with Montel Williams. He is, you've probably all heard of him. You've seen him around. He is a television personality, a military veteran, an MS survivor, and one of the original OG communicators for cannabis on the front line. Welcome, Montel. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks so much for having me, sir.
So let me ask you, it's been a crazy year, the past year. It seems like we're kind of coming out of the other end from the pandemic. You've been seen at a lot of cannabis events. What's kind of your takeaway right now as far as, the events opening back up and getting back out there, and just kind of what are your thoughts on where the state of the state is right now?
Wow, that could be an hour-long answer to a question. We have so many states of state that are going on. Let's just hope that we focus first on the impending pandemic. And though a lot of people wish that it was over, it clearly isn't over. I'm coming to you from Miami, and I don't know if you know, you've read the news and seen the highlights from this past weekend, but there was a state of emergency declared down here because there were so many people who were so anxious to leave COVID behind that they have decided to leave all mitigation techniques behind and be disorderly and ridiculous in their presence here in the Miami area, enough to push most of our residents back indoors to hunker down because of fear for being around people who are getting ready to spread these ridiculous variants. So, as much as I am excited that the industry is ready to reopen in some ways and get back to the mission at hand, and that is, working as hard as we can to get, the nation to recognize the efficaciousness of cannabis as a plant-based medicine. I'm also a little anxious and a little anxiety-ridden over the idea of some who don't understand the importance of still staying the course and trying to bring the scourge to an end. So, you ask a pretty broad question. There are all kinds of places we can go as an answer. One, I believe that this industry should be extremely proud of the fact that over the course of the last year, we have been probably the only, recession-proof industry in the country. There are several places, if you looked at the Leafly's, recent article talking about what has happened to this industry when it comes to job growth and other things, and also to, profit growth, the industry has done an incredible job. There are some states now that have more employees in cannabis than they do have police officers. So we recognize that the industry has done a big job, and the public has recognized that the industry is doing a good job because we've got a lot more consumers showing up and buying and purchasing larger amounts each time they make a purchase. So the industry should be happy about that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have failed to lead the charge, I think, over the course of last year, and educating the public, not the politicians, not the B2B, but educating the public as to how efficacious cannabis can be, even in their battle when it comes to COVID. I mean, there's been a couple of peer-reviewed studies that have been put out lately that talk about the anti-inflammatory effect of certain cannabinoids and flavonoids when it comes to infections of the lung. And even in the midst of COVID, we're now finding that consuming cannabis can be in some ways a neuroprotectant. And I know all of your listeners are going to go, "Oh, Montel, you didn't say that." Yes, I did say that. The fact of the matter is that, the research has been available for now well over 30 years that has proven the fact that cannabis, for 20 years, the cannabis can be a neuroprotectant, especially in the lung tissue. And there should be more research done that way. I'm heartened by the fact that, recently, an organization out of Southern California was just approved with an IRB to conduct a full observational study when it comes to cannabis as a front line of defense for PTSD. Though one of the recent studies that has come back hasn't shown, as broad a scale of efficaciousness as we'd like it to show, but that's because they ended up using a study using cannabis grown by Uncle Sam out of University of Mississippi, and we know what that trash is. So, I think I'm heartened by the industry, but at the same time, I'm a little disappointed in the industry because, we continue to focus more, I believe, on the B2B aspect of this than the B2C aspect of this, which is the business to consumer aspect of ensuring that we educate those who are potential customers and bring them along with us as we, make the strides that we make. I don't know. Did I answer that whole question?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. And I love the fact that you're right. We've kind of got to see the industry sort of earn its stripes, kind of grow up during this pandemic. I remember at the beginning of it, there were, labs that volunteered to help do testing. There was, places that were making hand sanitizer. It was, and then of course, cannabis became essential in a lot of these states. So you're right. I mean, it's been amazing to see. Could you imagine this 10, 20 years ago?
I mean, imagine it's 12 years ago. I mean, or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Let's just make sure we understand that, again, I believe that almost every single state that has a medical cannabis program considered cannabis an essential service.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a government that stepped up and said that we believe that this is an essential service. Yet we have a government that, a newly elected, administration that talked a lot of smack about a year ago, trying to impress people to make sure that they earn their vote, talking about how the fact that we were going to have some legislation come down the pike in the first 100 days, but haven't we hit that 100 days now? And I haven't seen the legislation come out of this administration yet. And, remember, we still have an administration who's led by someone who still believes that cannabis is a gateway drug. Let's calm down here. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
There's a lot of effort that needs to be done. And I believe that if the cannabis industry led the charge the way we should be, and again, that education from B to C,
mm-hmm.
we would have more troops out there on the front line demanding that the politicians do the right thing.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about veterans and cannabis. It's an area that's sort of near and dear to me. We've had some guests on the past, worked with Veterans Cannabis Coalition and some other organizations. It seems shocking to me that there's definitely, it's pretty clear that there's medical benefits. There's things that cannabis can help with for some of the issues that veterans are facing right now. And, can you just speak to the fact that it's not readily available to all veterans, or maybe, how it could be helping? Because it seems like one of the biggest no-brainers ever, to allow veterans access.
Well, let's remember, we are still living in a time where we have the head of the person who's a commander in chief who believes that cannabis is a gateway drug. Excuse me. I mean, let's get real here for a minute and recognize that over the course of the last 10 years, let's look at the last 10 years of the movement in the cannabis industry, though I won't cast an aspersion, I will say that greater efforts could have been made by those who were trying to improve their bottom line by doing more studies, even if those studies were done overseas and in other countries. We have a lot of investors and a lot of investment money coming in from overseas, that is sparking this boom in the stock market with several of the leading companies. But how many of them have published any peer-reviewed documents in the last year talking about the efficaciousness of cannabis when it comes to PTSD or pain or, a myriad of other ailments that our veterans suffer from? So I should say that, I have been involved in the cannabis space. I think a lot of people who are watching this interview know that I've been involved in this cannabis space now for close to 20 years, long before it was vogue. I was left out there on the street pretty much sometimes by myself, being beat up quite handily back in early 2001, 2002, without a lot of the industry coming back in to try to protect me, when I was going around the country trying to ensure, access for patients for efficacious medication all over the country, from Colorado to, I hosted, a debate among mayoral candidates back in 2001 in Colorado over, one of the initial Colorado cannabis bills, and I participated in, testifying before Congress in New Jersey and in New York and in Pennsylvania and in Florida and or California and in front of Missouri and Pennsylvania, several other states, Maryland. And my objective, even back then, 20 years ago, was to ensure that this medication, which we've now proven through our own dollars spent by the federal government in researching cannabis overseas, researching cannabis in places like Israel, where we confirmed back in 2001 that cannabis was an efficacious, plant-based medicine for PTSD back then when the Israeli military first wrote about it. So I have been an advocate for our veterans since the day I took my uniform off officially. I really never took it off. And feel very strongly that, yes, in fact, we hope that, the country opens up its eyes and allows for adult use across the board. But what we should do before we do anything is take the patients off the battlefield.
Yeah.
We should have been working since day one to ensure if this even gave some of our veterans 1 or 2% of a foot forward over their, struggles, this is something that we should have done day one. I mean, these are the people who we remember, and most people don't understand that, less than 1% of this country puts a uniform on its back to support and defend democracy for all. And could we not show that gratitude by just ensuring that they came first? We didn't. Yeah. So now we're here 20 years later, 20 years after the U.S. government gave itself its own patent for CBD, 30 years after the U.S. government funded research in Israel, 50 years after the U.S. government funded research out of the University of Mississippi, we're still questioning 50 years later whether or not all the anecdotal information that's been heard for 50 years, any of it is true. I mean, I just find that appalling and find that ridiculous and find that as asinine could be. So I don't know if a lot of your viewers understand that there is this tacit understanding in the VA that any veteran who lives in a state where it has a legal medical program, they will not be denied their veteran benefits if, in fact, they test positive for cannabis if they have a medical card from a state that they live in. But that also leaves a lot of our veterans who don't live in those states out on the lurch.
Yeah.
And though we just passed a farm bill that allows for CBD to be commercially used on an interstate basis, we aren't even scratching the surface of the viability of all of the other cannabinoids, including THC and THCA and CBG and CBC, all the anti-inflammatories, all the oxidative components that we have from terpenes and other things in the plant that could be of real good use to our vets. So, I would hope that over the course of the next year, as we come out of this one pandemic and we get ready to go into another pandemic of mental health issues in America, not just for our veterans, but for our frontline workers and for, the masses of people who have been hunkered down and isolated.
Yeah.
I think as we start to look at this as a group, we're going to be looking at, probably 30% of the U.S. population that should probably be using cannabis on a daily basis anyway. It could help us, especially when we're arguing about, the rising cost and the extreme cost of healthcare in America and the rising cost for, psychological care in America. This is something that could be a front line of defense if we were to do and apply and put the amount of money in that needs to go in there to do the research and start getting some of these peer-reviewed documents printed and shoved in the faces of our politicians.
Yeah, there's so much stigma that has been built up for so long. It seems like we're still battling that battle of for the plant has been demonized for so long. It takes a while, but it's like you said, it's that B2C campaign where there's a lot of people that it could do a lot of good for if we can just get over that hump, of the stigma that cannabis is just as bad as everything else out there. It's a real battle.
Think about the fact that every day when you turn on your television, you are inundated at least 20 times a day with ads from some varied pharmaceutical company trying to sell you a drug that's not made it into the mainstream yet. And what does a pharmaceutical company do? They make sure that they let the consumer know that there's a product available. Then the consumer goes to the doctor and says, "What about XYZ?" Then the doctor prescribes it. Then the doctor gets a kickback. Why can't we? I don't care if we kick back doctors from cannabis, but the bottom line is, we're not even allowed to talk about it, which is
Yeah.
really ignorant. And though we are allowed to talk about it in some ways, if we talk about it from a educational standpoint, there needs to be more education coming out of this industry on a daily basis, inundating the consumer, so the consumer goes, I didn't know that. Goes down and asks their doctor, and the doctor goes, I didn't know that. Read, learn, do a CME, a continuing medical education course, so that you learn. I mean, most doctors these days are just now starting to stumble on the fact that we have an endocannabinoid system, something that science has known about for over 30 years.
Yeah. There's nurses that don't know anything about cannabis. And, like you said, doctors, if they're in states that are not, kind of down with cannabis, they really, I'm surprised at how little knowledge is available to them. So you're right. We have to educate the masses and, let them know about these benefits.
Absolutely.
What was it that brought you out so early, in the game and so outspoken about cannabis? Was it you were diagnosed with MS? Was that?
It was my own personal journey with MS. I mean, I literally, back in 2000, when I was actually officially diagnosed,
Mhm.
I immediately was treated on the course of opioid addiction course. I mean, because of my symptoms, which was extreme neuropathic pain and in various places in my body. Doctors only had one mantra back then, and that mantra lasted for 20 years, and it still lasts till today. I mean, most people think that, if you ask the general public, they think that the opioid crisis is over. They're full of crap. The
Mhm.
opioid crisis is still in full swing. There are still people ODing all over America today because of their opioid addiction. Now they're having a harder time getting it, but they're stealing it out of people's, bathroom medicine cabinets, and they're still doctor shopping in different areas of the country that they can get away with it at. Um, but we still have doctors who still believe that opioids were the answer to pain. And back when I was first diagnosed, that's what my doctors seemed to think. But then I had a doctor who was smart enough to say, look, dude, if you stay on this opioid track that you're on, you're going to end up shutting down your kidneys, your liver. You've already almost shut down your entire intestinal tract, so you need to knock this off. And recommended to me, but would not go on record of saying it, but he recommended to me back in 2001, 2000 really, that, look, I heard about this stuff that's called marijuana, and there's one particular type of it. This is back in 2001. He was trying to come up with the name, CBD, and didn't
Mhm.
even know what he was saying. But he said, I heard about this. You got to do some research to try to figure it out. And so back in 2001, I started searching for and was able to find some, heavily laden plants that were CBD rich that some of the growers were trying to get rid of. And if
Wow.
you remember, most people in this country don't even know this, that during the early 60s and the 70s and the 80s, most of our growers up in Humboldt County were trying to grow the CBD out of the plant,
Mm.
not recognizing its efficaciousness and not even recognizing the fact that the medication that they were growing was more valuable with a full spectrum entourage effect. So we were trying to see if we could, and like they're still trying to do today, try to see if they could grow the highest level of THC that they can, not even understanding that, the levels of THC that we're hitting right now aren't really that viable and aren't really that useful to anybody.
Yeah.
So, we should literally be looking at a broader spectrum and looking at, a terpene rich, flavonoid rich plant that can have a broader spectrum that we can actually mix and mingle some of these cultivars together to elicit the response that we want. And so my journey took me in search of CBD-rich plants back in 2001, 2002. And when I started getting the relief that I was able to achieve, I really felt it almost criminal to not want to share that relief with others. And so that's why I started my advocacy back in 2001. And literally, I work with both DPA, MPP, anybody who would listen to get the word out that, we need to make medicine available to those patients out there that are in dire need. And so I started campaigning, back in 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5. I went to Israel back in 2011 and sat in Dr. Meshulam's office in Israel. And literally, I was one of the only people back then who had interviewed him on camera and talked to him at great length about, the research that they were doing in Israel back before we even began to think about this here.
Wow. Yeah. And Israel's been way ahead of the curve on the research for this. So you were.
A lot of people don't know that Israel's only been way ahead of the curve because of U.S. government funding, your taxpayer dollars that were being filtered into Israel back in, the 80s and the 90s, helped the U.S. government, form its own application for and grant itself its own patent on cannabinoids. So a lot of people don't even take the time to study even in the last 20 years of cannabis. One of the things you had said that, it's a plant that's been vilified for so much. Well, it's only been vilified in the United States of America for the last 100 years. But before that, this is a plant that was literally what helped build America. Most people don't do their research. Do something. The people that are watching us today should really dig in and do some research and recognize the fact that, our forefathers, all of them grew hemp. When this country was founded, it was mandatory by law to grow hemp. Everything that we consumed. I mean, we ate a porridge of hemp because back in the late 1600s, people recognized that the hemp plant was one of the highest protein-laden plants on the planet. People don't know and don't remember that the entire Revolutionary Army was clothed in hemp uniforms.
Wow.
All of our tents, all of our sails, all of our ropes that were made back in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s all came from hemp. The word canvas comes from cannabis. The clothing, if you were to look at newspapers that were written in the late 1800s after the Civil War, there are ads for, in the classifieds, there are probably hundreds of ads in every newspaper talking about, cannabis-based tinctures that were helping to alleviate pain and stress and PTSD from the Civil War. It wasn't until 1937 that we outlawed cannabis, and the guy who outlawed cannabis was a proponent of cannabis before he got on the stick knowing that he was about to lose his job. And I'm talking about Anslinger. Most people don't even know that, when he was running around as a prohibitionist against alcohol, he was touting the benefits of cannabis being a non-violent drug and alternative to alcohol. Come on.
Yeah. It's like, I keep going back to it. It seems like the biggest no-brainer in the history of no-brainers. And, we're just slowly moving along towards it. I'm glad you brought up though, the cannabinoids, the terpenes, we're really just starting to understand. Can you tell us a little bit about, LEV Labs and what's your goal there and what you guys are looking to do?
Sure. I had already, this is long before, again, I'm telling you, almost 9 years ago, when we started Lenitive Scientific, I wanted to literally put a brand in the marketplace. And so I reached out to a partner and formed a partnership with one of the bigger cannabis production companies in this country. And I was a partner, not a licensed, didn't do it as a, some sort of just a license deal. And I started creating products back about 9 years ago that were products that were formulations of multiple cannabinoids rather than just trying to put out a product of one. So, I have been, I'm pretty much a voracious reader and have a voracious appetite for as much knowledge as I can gain. So years ago, I started putting together formulations of both CBD and THC together in, carts that would be vaporable carts and adding a terpene formulation to that. Long before this has now become the vogue way that people are starting to look at it.
Right.
I went through a process of putting my own product in the marketplace. and that contract ran out. So I'm now very close to forming another partnership with another company here that'll be our contract manufacturer, and we'll have my products back in the marketplace very soon. Um, and they are products that are based more on their effect. And though it's anecdotal, we will be doing some studies with, some peer reviewed and some focus group studies and some, double blinded studies looking at the effects of what we're getting from a formulation. Because I believe in the full, as Dr. Mishulem first identified it, when he identified our endocannabinoid system and the receptors that actually literally receive or antagonized by cannabinoids. Um, I want to be able to produce a product that I know is going to elicit the effect that I put on the label. And so, I think it's extremely important that we get off this stick that we've been on, for the last 10 years, falsely identifying cultivars as, sativa or indica, falsely, identifying cultivars as hybrids. There isn't anything that's out there right now that isn't a hybrid of some sort. If you go back to the original, if you think that science is correct, that there was probably either 5 or 7 original plants, 5,000 years ago, those plants have all now been interbred, bred. That's the same way as the rose has gone from just red to pink to blue to green to black.
Sure.
We've done this to the cannabis plant over the course of the last couple thousand years. So, are there truly indicas out there anymore? Are there truly sativas out there anymore? Are there truly hybrids out there anymore? I think they're all pretty much a hybrid of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's a matter of taking advantage of not just the cannabinoids that we're starting to identify, which we know that, some research claims that there's well over 160 of them right now. There are probably somewhere between, 10 to 20 different terpenes that we can truly identify that have already been researched for the last 20 years. Researched because those terpenes have researched in other plants where they exist. And so we know some of their beneficial effects. And then we're starting to realize that the flavonoids have effect. And, when we put out a product, should we just be putting out a product that only focuses on one, or should we focus on the many? I think there was a while there where, there were people who were trying to, figure out how, they could get ooh-wee as high as we could get. But I believe that the majority of those consumers that are out there right now are looking for an experience to help them settle whatever their needs are. Even those that are coming to the table because they think of adult use, I believe that there's nobody that steps up to the table and uses cannabis unless they have some pre-existing medical condition that they may not even admit they have.
Right.
If you're using it for relaxation, that's a medical reason.
Mm-hmm.
If you're using it to, calm down from a busy day at work, that's a medical reason. So, why not provide a product that will help the patient achieve the results that they want to achieve, rather than us shove something down their throat that's just so inundating that, you end up, spending 3 or 4 hours on your couch, and that's not what you wanted to do to begin with. So again, the question was, what am I doing with Lenitive? So we're about to, get our products back out into the marketplace. I'm really excited about it. I've just had a couple of meetings this week, and we'll be going back into the lab personally myself. And like I did the first go round, I was in the lab myself. I helped formulate every product that we put out, and I will help formulate every product that I'm about to put back in the marketplace now. Those will be both CBD and THC products as we move forward. And hopefully my CBD products will be back and available nationwide. And, I've literally, just like you have this podcast, I have a podcast that's called Let's Be Blunt with Montel, where I have been in the very fortunate to be able to interview some of the, I'm telling you, the industry leaders, front runners, forethinkers in this industry. I've had them on and had a chance to talk to them in a way that they've been giving, a lot of information out to our listeners and viewers. I mean, recently I've had people on from like Bonnie Goldstein to, Mr. Hegden, who wrote the book, the cornbread mafia, which a lot of people in the country don't know about. I was really kind of shocked when I started digging deep into who the cornbread mafia was and where that story came from, and didn't recognize this is something that I didn't know. And was very excited to get the information about it. So, I've been really digging deep and trying my best to make sure that, I provide as much education as I can in this space.
Oh, I love it. Is that one of your favorite parts of the industry, is getting to talk to the people on your podcast?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, recently I spoke to Mr. Jim Higdon, and actually wrote the book, The Cornbread Mafia. I've had the opportunity to speak to Dr. Sally McKenzie, who is a GMO scientist at Penn State University. I was able to talk to Dr. Michelle Weiner, who is considered, the Florida doctor, the Florida cannabis doctor of note. I've also talked to Mr. Max Montrose, who runs the Trichome Institute. I think you probably know who they are, and also Nathaniel Pennington, who has the Humboldt Seed Company. In addition to, I talked to Stevie D and people who are running the Last Prison Project, and the gamut goes from them to Dr. Sanjay Gupta and Dr. Oz. So if you went up and found Let's Be Blunt with Montel on Facebook or on iTunes, I'm available on all of the outlets for podcast. You can look back. We've done probably all over 100 of them now, and there's something in there for everyone.
Well, I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to us. You truly are an OG, innovator from the very beginning, and I love the fact that you are so curious about the technology and really just.
In this industry, no two businesses are the same. Even so, common threads do exist, and printing on demand is nearly always one of them. Loda Enterprises can help. Loda has over 30 years of experience in on-demand printing. Whether you need to print full-color primary display labels, lab results, or simply mark the plants you grow, Loda can show you how. Call us at 800-654-5331 or visit www.loda.com to learn how Loda can help you implement your unique vision successfully.